I was already having a crap day. Work had been a disaster, and I couldn't shake the feeling that everyone was out to get me. You know those days where nothing goes right? That was mine, but worse. By the time I left, my head was spinning, paranoia digging in deep. I grabbed a few beers with the guys after just to drown it out. Didn't work, but what else was I supposed to do? Heading to the subway, everything felt off. Too quiet. The platform was practically empty, and that made no sense. I've been taking the same train, same time, for years, and it's never this dead. Usually people are packed in like sardines, but tonight, I could count maybe 3 people standing around. Red flags everywhere, but I shrugged it off. Figured maybe it was just one of those weird nights. Yeah, I know. Dumb. The train pulls up, doors open, and I step in. If the platform was quiet, the train was dead. Not just quiet, silent. Like the whole city had just packed up and left without telling me. My stomach was already turning, but I forced myself to sit. Tried to zone out, focus on anything but how wrong it felt. That's when they showed up. A group of loud, obnoxious jocks, stumbling in just before the doors shut. They were trashed, shouting over each other about some fight they watched. Typical idiots, slapping each other on the back and laughing like they were the only ones on the planet. I rolled my eyes, stayed quiet. Not in the mood for their crap, but too tired to engage. I figured they'd leave me alone if I kept my head down. Wrong again. I was just about to fade into my own thoughts when I saw them. 3 clowns. Full-on makeup, bright clothes, just standing by the doors like they belonged there. The weirdest part? No one else seemed to notice, not even the jocks, but I couldn't take my eyes off them. Something about it screamed wrong. My brain kicked into overdrive analyzing the situation. Why clowns? Why here? What was the angle? I started scanning everyone's faces, looking for signs that maybe, just maybe, they were all in on it. Yeah, I know how paranoid that sounds, but my gut was telling me there was more going on than I could see. The clowns didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there like they were waiting for something. It wasn't some random joke. That much I knew. My mind raced with theories, each one worse than the last. Were they part of some cult? Were they after someone on the train? And why wasn't anyone else reacting? Then, one of them pulled out a knife. My heart skipped. It wasn't even a good knife. Rusty, dull, like something you'd find at a garage sale. But it didn't matter. The second that blade appeared, every alarm in my head went off. This wasn't right. None of it was right. I glanced over at the jocks, hoping maybe one of them would finally notice. But no, they were still too busy running their mouths about their stupid night. I wanted to scream at them, shake them awake, but I froze. Typical, right? Freeze when it counts. The train jerked forward and the clowns started walking. Slow, deliberate, like they had all the time in the world to decide who they'd go after first. My heart was pounding, but I couldn't move. It felt like I was trapped in some nightmare, only it was real, and I was the only one who knew it. Finally, one of the jocks, the biggest one, noticed a clown coming toward him. For a second, I thought he might fight back. But nope. He froze too. Just stood there, eyes wide like a deer caught in headlights. I almost shook my head. How dumb could you be? The clown slashed at him with the knife, but it barely did anything. The blade was so dull it just scratched him. But the sight of blood? That was enough. The jock lost it, screaming like a kid, flailing around like the world was ending. It was pathetic, really. I mean, come on, it was just a scratch. The clown looked confused, like they hadn't expected the knife to be that useless. They just stood there, unsure what to do next. It was almost funny, but I couldn't laugh. Not yet. I was too busy waiting for the next move, waiting for everything to go to hell. But then the train stopped. The door slid open, and just like that, the clowns bolted. They were gone before I could even process it. Like scared kids running from a prank gone wrong. It didn't make sense. None of it did. I sat there, still trying to wrap my head around what just happened. The jocks? They were already trying to act tough again, like they hadn't just been screaming their heads off 2 minutes ago. The one who got cut, Chad, because of course his name's Chad, kept poking at his scratch like he couldn't believe it. I was just disgusted. The other passengers? They just stared at the open doors, probably thinking the same thing I was. What the hell just happened? The air was thick with confusion, tension. No one knew what to say or do. When the cops showed up at the next station, the clowns were long gone. Typical. I've never trusted authority, and this just confirmed it. They never show up when you actually need them. They questioned everyone, but the jocks were too wasted to be any help, and the rest of the passengers were still too shocked to give any real answers. Me? I tried to explain, but what could I say? I didn't even know how to make sense of it. Days later, I found out the clowns weren't even criminals, just some dumb kids pulling a prank for a viral video. My paranoia flared up again. What kind of world are we living in where kids think terrorizing people on a train is funny? I couldn't stop questioning everything. Why didn't I do something sooner? Why this train? Why me? My mind spiraled, and I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe, just maybe, this was all part of something bigger, something I couldn't see yet. It didn't take long for everything to change after that night. Every time I got on the subway, I felt it creeping in. The anxiety, the paranoia, like I was waiting for something else to go wrong. It didn't matter how normal everything looked. I saw problems everywhere. Shady people standing around like they didn't belong. Suspicious glances. I couldn't shake the feeling that everyone was hiding something, that they were waiting to cause trouble. The clowns had done something to me. They'd planted this seed in my head, and now it was growing out of control. I was on the train a few days later, and that's when I saw him, a guy in a hoodie. He looked off, standing by the door with his head down, not making eye contact with anyone. I couldn't stop staring at him, waiting for him to make a move, to show me why he looked so damn suspicious. My heart was pounding, but nothing happened. He just stood there, the doors opened, and he got off at his stop. But I couldn't calm down. I was convinced he was up to something. I couldn't prove it, but I knew it. It got to the point where I started avoiding the subway altogether. I'd rather walk 5 miles than get on one of those trains again, but even walking didn't help. The city felt different now, like the whole place had turned against me. I couldn't trust anyone. I'd pass people on the street and feel my stomach twist like they were watching me, waiting for the right moment to strike. I knew it was all in my head, but knowing didn't help. It never does. I tried to keep things normal, though. Met up with the guys again for drinks, but even that wasn't the same. We were at the bar, and these jocks started yelling and laughing at the next table, and all I could think about was that night on the train. Every time they laughed, it felt like a punch to the gut, like I was being pulled back into that subway car. I couldn't relax. I couldn't even hear myself think. Then one night, I was heading home late. It was dark, and I was already on edge when I saw them. A group of people dressed as clowns, walking down the street. My stomach dropped. For a second, I was sure it was happening again, that they'd come back for me. But then I realized they were just going to some stupid costume party. Just another coincidence. I tried to laugh it off, but I couldn't. Not really. I knew I was being paranoid, but deep down, I also knew I'd never feel safe again. I'd seen too much. The media made it worse. They blew the whole clown incident out of proportion, making it sound like the city was being overrun by dangerous people in costumes. I hated how they twisted the story, but it didn't matter. The damage was done. Everyone was scared now. People started acting differently on the subway, keeping their heads down, glancing around nervously like I had been. I felt vindicated in a way, like finally people were seeing the city the way I did. But it wasn't a good feeling. It was just sad. It wasn't long before I overheard someone talking about a new clown sighting. This one was more violent, or so they said. My paranoia flared up again. I started thinking maybe this was bigger than a few kids pulling a prank. Maybe the clowns were evolving into something worse. I didn't know. But my mind wouldn't stop racing with possibilities. Then the rumors started. Vigilantes, they called them. People who'd had enough and were hunting down the clowns themselves. taking justice into their own hands. I didn't know whether to believe it, but it didn't sit right with me. I didn't like the idea of random people running around thinking they could do the job the cops should be doing. But then again, could I even trust the cops? They hadn't helped that night. They'd never helped. Posters about clown-related incidents started popping up everywhere. The subway walls were plastered with them. It had become this full-blown urban myth, and the whole city was on edge. I couldn't believe how fast it had spiraled out of control. This place didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like I was living in some twisted version of the city I used to know, where every corner held a new danger. My friends? They thought it was all hilarious. They started making fun of me, saying I was taking the whole clown thing way too seriously, but they hadn't been there that night. They hadn't seen what I'd seen. I knew it was only going to get worse, and no one believed me. One day, I heard about a guy who got jumped by a group of people dressed as clowns. Only this time, it wasn't a prank. He ended up in the hospital, beaten so badly he couldn't even talk. The whole city was buzzing about it, and I felt this dread settle in my chest. It wasn't just in my head anymore. This was real, and it was getting worse. The cops put out a statement saying they were cracking down on the clown incidents, but I didn't believe them. I'd seen how useless they were firsthand. If anything, I figured it'd just get swept under the rug like everything else. So I started thinking about how to protect myself. I wasn't going to get caught off guard again, that's for damn sure. One night I was walking home and I heard footsteps behind me. My heart jumped into my throat. I turned around expecting to see a clown with a knife or worse, but it was just some guy heading in the same direction. Still, the fear didn't leave. It stuck with me all the way home. I started carrying a knife. I didn't want to, but I felt like I had no choice. The thought of being defenseless again, like that night on the subway, was too much. I wasn't going to let it happen. Not again. The anxiety got so bad I couldn't sleep. Every noise outside my window sounded like footsteps. Every shadow felt like someone was watching me. I knew it was irrational, but it didn't matter. The fear was real. One evening I was walking through the city, and I saw a poster for some clown-themed event. It made my blood boil. People were still treating this like a joke while I was living in constant fear. How could they not see what was happening? How could they be so blind? The clowns even started invading my dreams. Every night I'd see them, twisted, distorted versions of the ones from the subway. They'd chase me, taunt me, and no matter how fast I ran, I couldn't escape. It was like the fear had followed me into my own mind, and there was no way out. Eventually, I had to get out. I couldn't take it anymore. The city, the fear, the paranoia. It was too much. The clowns had ruined everything for me, and I knew if I didn't leave, it would consume me. So I packed my things and left. I didn't even tell anyone. I just left. It was the only way I could survive. Story 2. We were laughing about that carnival all the way back. It was a disaster from the start, cheap rides barely holding together, clowns looking like they didn't belong anywhere near kids. There was one, though, that had this face. I don't know, something was wrong with it. His smile didn't fit, almost like his face was put together wrong. We joked about it, trying to shake off the weird vibe it left behind, but that night stuck with me more than I wanted to admit. Next day, I'm at the gym, trying to zone out while Jay and Rick do their usual idiot routine. You know, chest puffed out, acting like they're about to break some world record in bench pressing. I was in the middle of my set when I caught something in the window. Just for a second, I swear it looked like that clown from the carnival. I blinked, but he was gone, like it didn't even happen. I tried to brush it off, probably just a trick of the light or something. But that feeling hit, the one where you know something's off, deep down. Then Jay and Rick start arguing about who could lift more, like always. Dumbest competition ever, honestly, but they live for it. I was half listening, but couldn't get my focus back. I glanced out the window again, and there he was, the same clown, but closer this time. He wasn't just there by chance, he was watching me. I shook my head like I was trying to clear a bad dream. I tell Jay and Rick because I figured maybe it's just me being stupid or paranoid, but they don't take me seriously. They laugh. Typical meathead stuff, calling me crazy and telling me I need to stop thinking so much. It's all in good fun, I guess, but it doesn't shake the feeling creeping up my spine. By the time I'm done with my workout, I just want to leave. Get some air. Clear my head. But as soon as I walk out of the locker room, I see him again, this time at the front door. He's just standing there like he's waiting for me. I walk up, trying to act tough, ask him what the hell he wants, but he doesn't say a word. Just stands there grinning like this is some big joke. And then Rick comes out of nowhere, laughing like a hyena, saying it's all just a prank. Says the clown is his cousin and they've been setting me up all day. I try to laugh it off, but something's not right. His eyes didn't match that grin. Something didn't connect, like he wasn't just in on a joke. He was part of something else. That night I couldn't sleep. My mind kept looping back to that face, those eyes that felt like they were cutting right through me. I tried to convince myself it was all in my head, but when I woke up to tapping on my window, I knew I wasn't just imagining things. I looked out, and there he was again, standing under the streetlight across the road, not moving, just watching. I didn't move either. I didn't know what to do. Next day I kept quiet about it. Didn't want Jay or Rick thinking I'd gone completely off the deep end. But the feeling stayed, like he was still watching me. At the gym, it happened again. I was lifting, and I felt it, that heavy feeling like someone's breathing down your neck. I turned, and there he was, inside this time. I lost it, dropped the weights, caused a scene. Of course, Jay and Rick thought I was just messing around, calling me weak, calling me paranoid. I rushed to the locker room, splashed water on my face, just trying to get it together. But when I looked in the mirror, he was behind me. I spun around, but the room was empty. I couldn't stay there. I couldn't even think straight. I skipped the rest of the workout, left without saying anything. They called me a baby, but at that point, I didn't care. Walking home that night, I felt it again, like eyes were on me, like someone was right behind me, every step. But every time I looked back, there was nothing, just empty streets. Next morning, there's a clown balloon tied to my front door. That's when I really started losing it. I text Rick, ask him if he's still screwing with me, but he swears it wasn't him. That's when I check my phone and see it, a text from a number I don't know. 4 words, simple as that. You can't ignore me forever. I blocked the number, like that would actually help, but my head was spinning. Everywhere I went, I saw him. In the corners of mirrors, in shadows, even just walking down the street. I kept telling myself I was imagining it, that this whole thing had gotten under my skin, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was always there, watching. I couldn't trust anything. Not my own eyes, not the people around me. Every reflection felt like a threat. Jay and Rick dragged me out to the bar, like always, and they were doing their usual thing, talking loud, cracking dumb jokes, acting like nothing could touch them. I tried to laugh along, but I couldn't relax. Every second I kept looking over my shoulder, feeling that same unease crawling up my neck. I could barely hear their stupid stories, too busy scanning the room, watching the door, the windows. But nothing happened, not at first. When we finally left, I thought maybe I'd get a break from it all, maybe just a little peace. But no, he was there again. Across the street, standing perfectly still under a streetlight, that same grin plastered on his face. I snapped. I couldn't hold it anymore. I started yelling, demanding to know what he wanted, but Jay and Rick just cracked up. They thought I was drunk, overreacting. They laughed so hard they nearly fell over. Back home, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Something was off about this whole thing. So I did what anyone would do. I stayed up half the night reading every creepy story I could find about clowns, urban legends, anything that could explain why this was happening to me. That's when I found it. A story buried in the back of some old forum years ago about a kid who went missing at the carnival. No trace, no clues, just vanished. The worst part? There was a picture, an old one, from that carnival, and there, right in the middle, was the clown. The same clown that's been haunting me. Same smile, same dead eyes. The next day, I confronted Rick. I had to know if this was just some twisted joke, if his cousin was still messing with me. But when I asked him, he went pale. He told me straight. He doesn't have a cousin who's a clown. Jay was still laughing, thinking Rick was in on it, but I could see Rick was spooked. He was telling the truth. Then I got another text. Same unknown number. See you soon. That night, everything went to hell. My power went out around midnight, and the house went dead quiet. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Coming from outside. I grabbed the bat I keep by the door, heart racing, and opened it, ready to swing. There he was, standing in my front yard, holding a red balloon. But when I blinked, he was gone. Just like that. Gone. I called the cops, but of course they didn't find anything. Why would they? By now, nobody believed me. Not even Jay or Rick. Everyone thought I was losing it. And maybe I was. Sleep became a distant memory. I was constantly on edge, checking windows, doors, scanning every shadow for any sign of him. He was everywhere. Always watching, always lurking. At the gym, I avoided the mirrors. I knew I'd see him if I looked. But no matter where I went, I felt him there, just out of sight, in the corner of my eye. I couldn't even finish a workout without looking over my shoulder, waiting for him to appear. I confronted Rick again, told him this had to stop, whatever joke he was playing. But this time, he didn't laugh. He looked at me dead serious, eyes wide, and said, "I haven't seen the clown in days." Then Jay went missing. We found his car outside the gym, but no sign of him. It didn't take a genius to figure out what happened. I knew the clown had something to do with it. I knew this whole thing was more than just a prank or some hallucination. I was sure of it. That night, I broke into the gym after hours, desperate for answers. I needed to know if I was going crazy. I pulled up the security footage, scanning it for anything, and there it was, the clown, following me. From the locker room to the front door. He'd been there all along. Then my phone rang. It was Rick, his voice shaky, barely a whisper. He told me the clown had been outside his house, just standing there, watching him through the window. He was terrified. That's when I made up my mind. I couldn't live like this anymore. I grabbed the bat again and headed to the carnival grounds, where it all started. They'd shut the place down years ago, but I knew he'd be there. He had to be. Sure enough, when I got there, he was waiting, standing in the same spot where I'd seen him that first night. I didn't hesitate. I swung the bat as hard as I could, but it passed right through him. No impact, no resistance. He wasn't real, just a figment of my imagination, a hallucination born from my own stress and paranoia. Or so I thought. As I turned to leave, I got one last text. "I'll be back."